All right, Digging Deeper audience, we are back for another week. It is bittersweet because, actually I don't know why it's bitter or sweet, but we are finishing our discussions on Leviticus today. To my left and my right, I have a lot of wisdom, a lot of knowledge. You're familiar with them. We got Austin Abbott to my right. Austin, how you doing?
Doing great, man. Doing real good.
Yeah, good to hear.
Happy to be with you.
Oh, I'm happy to. Oh, thanks. I'm happy to be with you guys
It's
too.
endearing. It's touching.
And to my left, he's starting to become a frequent flyer here. Honestly, you were almost everywhere this weekend, Andy. You got Andy Fry to my left. So you taught at downtown in the morning. Took a quick trip out to Redwood. Taught there.
9.5 minutes.
9.5 minutes.
I hope there are no police watching.
Following all of the speed rules.
Absolutely.
Come back for the triple header downtown.
Yeah.
How was it?
It's fine.
Yeah?
Everything went smooth. So it may surprise some people to know that I finished on time.
Wow.
I know, yes.
Wow.
Yes, that's rare.
Yes.
I may be known for going a little over, but no, I was on schedule.
Well,
Great,
you're
man.
in good audience.
We're kindred spirits, my friend.
Out at Rogue River.
So I've heard, actually.
Yeah. Oh,
When I teach 30 minutes,
reputation.
I knew I liked him. So.
the crowd doesn't know what to do with the extra 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Well, audience, as you guys are going to be listening to this on Wednesday, we actually found out that it is going to be Andy and his wonderful wife Terry's 31st wedding anniversary on Wednesday. So, to a couple young guys, we've been married, I think, a combined 10 years, maybe. One sentence of wisdom that will change our marriage forever. What do you got?
Forgiveness.
From the wife, right? Naturally, like
Just forgive
Forgiveness.
and beg for forgiveness. You may do more begging, but no.
Nice.
Forgiveness, patience, grace. Yes. A lot of things you think matter won't matter 5-10 years from now.
There you go.
All right. And I'm
good.
guessing a lot of our seasoned married couples on the other side of the camera are nodding in agreement. If you're young and listening, take note. You
File
get that
it away.
You get that one for free. So the next one we
right.
charge. Yeah. Well, let's dig right into it. We're going to talk about Leviticus. We're going to wrap it up, put a bow on it, and then we're actually going to do a little prelude into Philippians for where we're kind of going next as a church. So to you guys, I want to ask you both. We're just finishing an Old Testament book. What is the biggest takeaway that a Christian can have from digging into an Old Testament book? The biggest takeaway a Christian can take from a book without Jesus.
Well, I'll tell you one thing that I always appreciate about the Old Testament is reading the stories, back in the Old Testament, stories in Judges, stories in Joshua. And one of my consistent takeaways that I always just love, kind of zooming out, is learning about the character of God and the way that he interacts with people. I think the Old Testament does a wonderful job of showing us God's character through very clear, vivid, engaging stories. And so when I read the Old Testament, I'm just constantly reminded about God's characteristics and the way he interacts, his humor, his love, his kindness, his mercy, his grace, his wrath. And so that's one big takeaway I always get from reading the Old Testament books, is just the character of God and really who God is.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, God's character.
Yeah.
All right. Andy, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fun for me because I hadn't dug into Leviticus before, at least not hardly.
Not on purpose.
You and me
Not
both,
even
my
close.
friend. You and me both.
Yeah,
You and us and about 99% of our church.
And full disclosure, I didn't go to Bible school, so to me, sometimes some things I know a lot about, but Leviticus was new, and it was. My wife will tell you I way over prep, but part of it is because I was just starting to have fun learning stuff. They're like, well, I won't use this, but this is really cool.
Yeah.
But the thing that struck me a lot is just how real the Old Testament is. And I think, when I was a young Christian, and I think a lot of people, we sort of elevate the Bible up here as this sort of mysterious thing that is not connected to human reality. And one of the things about the character of God, like Austin was saying, is that he's very real. And the Bible, when you read the Quran or you read the Hindu Vedas, it's very spiritual. And then you read the Bible, and these are very real people. Mm-hmm. The Bible is God dealing with humanity in all humanity's weirdness and ugliness, and God deals with that. He has the sacrifices. It's almost like he says, I know you guys are going to mess up. So I've kind of thought about this in advance. I have a way for you to be constantly reminded about our relationship. And it's real practical. You look at, one of the things in Leviticus was about fruit trees, which you go, okay, well, why do I have to wait 5 years? And it turns out that that's actually good for fruit trees.
Yeah.
It turns out that's good farming. And so the Bible connects to our reality, and God connects to our reality in a very down-to-earth way, even when our reality is ugly. And God's making provision for his people and saying, hey, when this happens, you need to know that there's a way for us to be reconciled. And so, I love the earthy reality of the Old Testament, and that it's not some abstract book, but it's a real God dealing with real people in a real world.
Yeah, I can't think of how many times I've read, Old Testament story, and be like, I can relate to that person, and it's generally not like the best, like they're messing up or something, but no, very good response. All right, so, and I will say, our teaching team, I think we've shared this on Digging Deeper a few times. There was a little bit of people that were like, nah, we don't need to do this, we don't want to do this, but I was.
And by a little bit of people, you mean me.
Oh, yeah. The Rogue River team, which I'm a part of, we were a little skeptical that there's got to be other books, but I was thoroughly surprised. I was thoroughly surprised, and I'm very happy and excited that we did it. But my question to you guys, let's say we as a teaching team, we're getting ready to go and do another Old Testament book.
Yeah.
For X amount of weeks. Where would you want to direct us if it was your call?
Well, I think if you were to rewind this podcast and look back at the very beginning of the Leviticus series, I was not a proponent of doing Leviticus.
I think we actually started that with you and Tyler, right?
Yeah, I think so. And so this is kind of I think in that episode you actually said, we'll have Austin on at the very end. And so voila.
Oh, there we go.
Here I am.
Almost like I did it on purpose.
Tim's planning ahead, guys. Watch out. But I enjoyed it. I still, maybe I'm just stubborn, but I would still want to go into a book like Nehemiah. I felt like personally, when you looked at our culture, when you looked at what was going on socially, economically, just culturally as a whole, to me, it felt like Leviticus. Obviously, God's word is inspired. It's relevant. It's good. But I felt like the story and the narrative of Nehemiah would have been more beneficial in this time, in this day and age, especially with everything in line with COVID. The idea of rebuilding Jerusalem, exiled. I just feel like there's some big themes in that book that would have been incredibly real and relevant. That's a throwback to a little thing we used to talk about. So for me, if I was jumping into another one, I would jump into the one I suggested first, but lost the vote, and that would be Nehemiah.
Okay, so you're sticking.
I'm sticking to my guns. For the record, on a scale of 1 to 10, going into the sermon series through Leviticus, my expectations were that it was going to be a 1. That it was not. It was just not going to be.
You
good.
were like almost worried.
I completely was. Yeah, I was not excited about teaching
people
through.
Back into church.
And then we're like, hey, come back to church. COVID. Well, yeah, come back to church. And guess what? Leviticus. It's like, come on, what are we doing? But so my expectations going in were very low, but they surpassed my expectations, and so I'm happy about that. It's almost like God's word is inspired.
Oh,
who would have thought?
You heard it here.
Who would have thought?
You gonna put now? I don't think I was spacing out. Do you put a number like your expectations were 1?
I enjoyed it. I didn't love it though. I'm going to be completely honest. Like I thought it was, in my mind, I'd give it about a 5.
Okay.
And I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer. I'm really not trying to be a Debbie Downer. I just felt this rhythm, and Andy, you can speak into this, and maybe you can as well, Tim, where there were many times I felt like we were covering similar topics over and over again. And not bad topics.
Holiness of God.
Holiness of God, and that was a big theme in the book of Leviticus. I don't know. That makes me sound bad, like I'm hating on
the villain.
Sorry,
one of us, and it's not going to be.
I'm not going to be as extreme as Austin, but I will say so. Terry and I've been here for about a year, and so it was just in March when I told Tyler, I'm ready to kind of help out. We took a little space there, and he said, "Great, it's going to be Leviticus." I was like, "All right,
we're going to take a little bit more space."
It was like, "Oh," and I think I might have made a joke the first Sunday, like, "Is this Hayes the new guy?" It's like, "Oh, okay, you want to get up here? Try this, right?"
Yep.
It was again like Austin. I was excited by the end about like, hey, this actually was pretty good.
Yeah.
And the chapter that I thought that Tyler asked me to preach on, chapter 19, which had just this list. I actually had more fun with that than of the 3 that I did. So there were a lot of surprises for me in this, and they were good surprises. I love Nehemiah. Good call. I like wisdom books. I like Ecclesiastes, but I'm kind of weird, so I'd have to think about that from would anybody else like Ecclesiastes. But I like that one. I like the wisdom books in general, though. Proverbs just got all sorts of great nuggets in there. So that's kind of my first thought is, that could be super applicable and relevant and fun and so on. But Nehemiah is great. I love that story, building the wall. I used Ecclesiastes to do baccalaureate at Grants Pass and as a kind of a springboard, and that was fun.
Ecclesiastes, that would actually be a great call. All is vanity, everything is vanity. That would be a great book, especially in this cultural moment, to be able to compare, to talk about hope. Yeah. And so I think that's great. Yeah. It's a good suggestion.
I like both of those. We'll see. Yeah.
Of course, that's not where we're going, though.
That's not where we're going. No.
Well, you specified OT, so
yes. Well, exactly.
Yeah, if you're going OT, that's where I'm going.
At some point, we're going to have a conversation in our teaching team meeting of, all right, we're going to go back to the Old Testament. What do we do?
Numbers. Actually, my first thought was Genesis, but I threw that out since you already did that recently. So
there is a pattern. We did Genesis, Exodus. Yeah. Guess where we're going?
So guess what, friends? Numbers and Deuteronomy.
But hey,
that'll be in 2026.
Yes, that'll be a different time.
That's right.
It'll be good. But all right, well, let's get to Leviticus 26, obedience. Gonna kind of do Leviticus 26 recap, but also Leviticus as a whole. Question for you, Andy, and I don't know if there's a lot here in this question, but it's kind of something I was thinking about as I was reading. There's this covenant. God laid out this covenant for the Israelites, and they just simply spent hundreds of years breaking it. So, did the covenant work? And then I guess my follow-up is going to be, do you think Old Testament law was more meant for the Israelites there, or more like in God and his, omniscience and eternal mindset, or was it more for us or Gentiles to glean on it? So kind of a weird question. I'm just going to set it on the table, let you guys unpack it a little bit.
Well, I think you have to define what you mean by work, and then you have to back up and say, did God give the covenant an expectation that anybody would keep it? And, if you look at Paul, or you even look at Jesus, the reality is even God knows they're not going to keep it. Paul says the law is a tutor, right? It's not something we can keep. And yet in the covenant, baked into it, into even the punishments, is grace, right? I'm going to punish you, but if you'll come back, if you'll repent. And so if you see the covenant as, here's this list of rules that, ideally humans are going to keep this list of the covenant and the 613 rabbinical commands and the whole deal. The law is the standard. And one of the biggest lessons you can learn is that you cannot keep the standard. That is the whole reason for grace. And so grace is also part of the covenant, because that's what the sacrifices are. God does not actually need dead sheep. Okay, that is something to remind you of your constant dependence on God's grace. So there are spaces where the covenant works if you throw out the idea that this is a set of rules that humans are going to keep perfectly. But God knew full well that wasn't going to happen. Does Israel, now a different way you look at it, does Israel as a nation reap the blessings in Leviticus 26 because they're doing covenant well enough? And Tyler pointed out a week ago that, there's no record that they ever did keep covenant. I mean, the seventh day, pretty strict on, but did they take the seventh year off? Did they do the year of Jubilee? Did they actually do that? And we have no record that they did. And in fact, one of the things that the seventh year and the Jubilee year included was releasing people from contracts and releasing people from debt. And I'm going to bet that was really hard for them to do, because when you look at the prophets later on, what are they chewing the Israelites out for? They're saying, you are not keeping covenant, you are not keeping Sabbath. And then there's a whole lot about oppressing the poor. Why? Because they didn't keep Sabbath. They didn't release them from those debts. They're like, I'm not letting your debts go. So in that sense, no, it doesn't work. But again, I think I would come back to the first point is, what is really the purpose of the covenant? Why is God doing this? And I think he's creating a space for them to realize they need his grace And then, of course, for those of us in the new covenant, there's quite a bit in there foreshadowing the ultimate act of grace that's to come.
Yeah. Yeah. And if I could add on to that as well, I think that's very well said. But even looking at the whole Old Testament narrative and specifically God's role with the nation of Israel, it is just an example also of our fallen state and need and desperate need for God's grace. And so, yeah, Galatians 3 does a phenomenal example of showing us that if you are in Christ, you are from the seed of Abraham. And so did it work in the sense of God using the nation of Israel to bring the story of the Messiah to us? Yes, it worked. Because through the nation of Israel, through the seed of Abraham, we are given this opportunity to understand and receive the King of the Jews, Jesus himself, our Messiah. And so, yes, it did, but also, like Andy said, no. So.
Yeah. No, so I think when I was thinking of that question, I'm like, all right, this is a both and, or this is kind of the questions that maybe doesn't need to be asked, but I think I wanted to ask it for those brilliant answers that you guys gave. And
I would say, neither do we, right? I mean, you and I know what it is to sin, and yet we do it.
We're picking up right where the Israelites
left
off.
Yeah. So, I mean, none of us are righteous in it enough in and of our own strength, because God's standard is perfect holiness. But it tells us where the bar is. It gives us a rule to live by, and thankfully grace is also within both the old covenant and even more so in the new.
Yeah. One thing that I also appreciate so much about the Old Testament, and even just the following the narrative of the nation of Israel, is how many of these principles are timeless and just beneficial from a human standard.
Yep.
One thing I really did enjoy about Leviticus is some of the cleanliness standards that we studied through that may look stringent and ridiculous from the outside looking in, but those were actually given by God as a gift to his people to save them from certain diseases, to save them from other issues that would come upon them. And so, it's fascinating to me that when you take Old Testament, even biblical principles, and you apply them to a secular person's life, their life will turn out from the outside looking in better. And so I think that's another very fascinating thing about the Old Testament, Old Covenant area.
No, that was fascinating.
The principles.
Just realizing that, I think the one I think about is the days after childbirth. I remember Tani in our meeting really pointed this out from a woman's point of view, and you're just like, that's really rude that she's unclean for 33 days or 66. And then Tani was like, from a lady who has given birth, that is a month of rest that she gets after giving birth.
Yeah.
2 months if it's a girl, sign me up. And so that was kind of the opening of my mind to wow, everything you just said.
The Seventh-day Adventists, when we were talking about, I forget what it was, there was some awesome statistics about the Seventh-day Adventist and how long, 7 to 10 years more.
Yeah.
Yeah, by keeping that seventh day of rest, finding a time to Sabbath, whether it be the level of income they have, the rate on marriage, of staying married together, the divorce rate, longer lives. I mean, there are so many principles from the Old Testament in the Israelite Jewish community that were beneficial then that are still beneficial now. Yeah. So a lot of things worked back then. Still work today.
Yeah. And Austin, we're going to keep the needle on you. So now we're kind of looking at consequences of breaking the law. And you and I were spitballing this a little earlier, and I think we have a little bit different point of view, which is great. Remember, I'm just the guy that talks. You guys get to say all the smart things. But
stop it!
Stop it! I'm the guy with the face on my mug, but I don't have my mug here today.
Heartbreak
It
City,
got brought
man.
home, but it'll come back because.
Gotta have it, man.
Yeah, gotta have it.
Gotta have it.
All right, there's consequences for breaking Old Testament law, and we see that. And how I kind of view it is it's very direct. It's very quick. Harsh might be some word that somebody applies, but it's very very quick. A quick response, the punishment. You see it naturally seem to happen pretty quick. And now, in our lives, in the New Testament, there are consequences for breaking the law. But in my opinion, they're different. I kind of, as we were discussing this earlier, I'm thinking, if you stole a sheep from somebody, you were going to get smited, you were going to give up the sheep, you're going to get your hand cut off, whatever. But here I feel like some people you can live in your sin for decades.
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem to ever get revealed, but there still are consequences that are happening, whether it's the hardening of your heart and whatnot. So that was my thought behind this question. And as we were talking earlier, you had a really good response. I kind of want you to unpack.
Well, so I think the answer is yes and no. I think it's multifaceted. So I do think in the Old Testament, again, we just talked about this. specifically in the book of Leviticus, God does an incredible job of laying out his standard of holiness. And what is that standard? That standard is perfection. Anything less is not okay. And it's rejected by God. It's worthy of consequence. You bring something in there that's not okay, there are consequences. Think Nadab and Abihu, right? Strange fire, what happened? Boom, immediately. Aaron, should you worry? Should you, be sad about it? God says, absolutely not. What they did was wrong. So I think that shows that God is fierce. His wrath is completely just. And consequences were swift. Another example of this is King David. Remember when they were transporting the Ark of the Covenant and it started to slip a little bit and somebody reached out to grab it, touched it, unholy, boom, dead. It's like, isn't that a little bit harsh? Maybe, perhaps. But again, what's the standard? The standard is God is holy. God is perfect. Anything less than perfection is a problem. And so I think in the Old Testament, there is this emphasis on the severity and the seriousness of the wrath of God and a part of God's character that is very clear and very obvious. Now, fast forward that to the New Testament a little bit. I still think we see parts of that. In the New Testament, when it is
Ananias and Sapphira.
Ananias and Sapphira, withholding some stuff, and bam, what happened to them? Boom, same thing. Nadab and Abihu 2.0. It's actually very similar to each other. But at the same time, John 3:17, Jesus says, that he did not come to judge the world, but to save the world. And so I think in John 3:17 and even in the book of Acts, we see it changing of dispensations perhaps, moving to a dispensation of grace where God's wrath is still very real. Consequences are still very real. But at the same time, what we also see is a period of an immense amount of grace given to us, where consequences still are a thing, but maybe we don't see them the way that Nadab and Abihu did. Okay. I don't know. Andy, what do you think?
Well, yeah, I think you're right. There's moments of just instant punishment, and you see, hey, God's pretty serious about this. You look at the consequences of the punishments for the nation, because remember, this is not a covenant between an individual and God. This is God and the nation, and it's not for little stuff, because that's why they'd sacrifice. He's like, yeah, you're going to sin. That's why I've sacrificed. This is, the language is for this continuous rebellion, and certainly all you got to do is read the history of the Israelites in the Old Testament, and invasion, exile, it happens. I mean,
God, a rhythm of that.
There's a rhythm of that.
Yeah.
And yet, you also have the psalmist saying, "Why are the wicked prospering?" Right. So, that guy got smited. That guy's wicked as anything, and yet they're living high on the hog, right? And so it's easy for us to kind of be very on-off switch binary about God's justice, and forget that God is just and his timing is just, and today. So we look at us today, and there are people who sin, and boom, things happen, right? Because, really God tells us things so that we can live an abundant life. That's what Jesus promised. I've come to bring you abundant life. And in the Old Testament, follow these commands so that they may go well with you. It turns out the Creator knows how best to live your life better than you do.
Who would have thought? Who would have thought?
What a concept.
Curveball.
Yeah, most of us, when we get a gadget, throw away the warranty and the instructions, and I can figure this out. It's like, well, the guy who made it probably knows what's up.
Right, exactly.
And yet sometimes we do see, why do the wicked prosper and what's going on, And so we always are looking at this from our perspective, the speed or the lack of speed in God's justice. But the fact of the matter is that God is God, and when he acts, his timing is perfect, his justice is perfect. And we can never have that perspective. So to come back to your question, I think the consequences are in some sense the same, right? And I'm not just talking about heaven or hell. I'm talking about, at the end of the day, the consequences, God has always been just in his timing and his consequences for individuals and nations.
Yeah.
It looks different to us, but to him, it's consistent. Not the same, but consistent. It's perfectly just. And so, we can get ourselves in a weird headspace about comparing.
Oh, totally.
Well, and also when you just keep in mind that, what we deserve also, and then versus what we're getting is two different things.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very easy to go, well, what about them? But then you just got to turn and go, well, oh shoot, I'm right in the same boat. Thank you, Lord, for your grace.
And I'll tell you, this is where I might have a little advantage over both of you. Once you've had two kids, You understand God real well. What about him? It's like, no, we're not talking about him. It's like, oh, God, I do that to you, don't I? Right? I'm like a 5-year-old sometimes. So it's you hear that and you go, oh, I understand why God
Makes a little more sense.
does in a small way.
Yeah.
Little window.
Completely.
Getting ready for that.
Yeah, Tim's about to. Yeah.
Yep.
Good
Get
luck,
ready,
buddy.
man.
I have heard a few. That's kind of maybe the first time I've heard it in that context. I've heard you hold your kid for the first time and you gain a little bit better of an understanding of the severity of what God did with Jesus. Like the sacrifice of Jesus.
Oh, there's lots of insights.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Well, yeah, but that's the first one where
That's
like
another
you
one,
kind of
yeah.
start to realize, this 5-year-old to me is like me to God. And, so
Yeah.
yeah, I forget. It might have been you. I don't remember. Somebody said no. I think it was somebody at Rogue River. They said you hold that kid in your arms, and you're just like, wow, I would jump in front of a truck for them. And he's like,
Yep.
Then they become a teenager, and you think I would throw them in front of a truck. They were kidding.
Can you confirm or deny that, Andy?
It wasn't.
No.
It was. I do remember who it was.
I don't think I ever said anything about throwing my children. I hope you're not watching right now in front of
It was somebody at a Rogue River.
But there are moments where you do understand smiting.
Yeah.
So I'm excited
Totally.
for that purpose. All the sermon illustrations those little baby's going to give us. So
Yeah.
all right, well,
It's visceral.
Yeah, right.
that is going to kind of put a bow on Leviticus, unless there's any final thoughts that you guys have regarding that wonderful book.
Well, so kind of one little part of that question too that I think is really good, and I talked about this a little bit in my lesson this weekend. And Andy, I haven't gotten around listening to yours yet, but I'm planning on it because you taught everywhere this week, so I figured I kind of have to.
Hard to miss.
But is God's role in loving us through
blessings through consequences.
through consequences,
Yeah, absolutely.
and how that doesn't always have to be taken as God hates me, but actually God loves me, and how consequences are a way that He shows He loves us by having consequences and allowing us to walk through hard times so that we see the desperate need we need for Him, or we have for Him.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So-
And I did. You and I were on the same page there.
Yeah. I mean, and the Leviticus 26, like, dude, as I was studying it this week, I'm like, holy cow. God blesses obedience. God curses disobedience. God is merciful. It's like, that's just such a beautiful bang, bang, bang in those verses there. I mean, remarkable. And so,
And in preaching, I use the illustration. I was a soccer referee and how those consequences escalate.
totally.
And I did the same thing, but the goal was always to keep the player in the game, not to toss him. And that's God, right? Because he says, here's consequences. Now, if you will not listen, there are more if you will not listen, right? But it's that if you will not listen, right? And if you've ever disciplined anybody, you're like, okay, I'm going to turn the screw little by little. I'd really rather you came back home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I thought it was fascinating in that first part of how God blesses obedience, how in verse 3 it says, if you, and then it has 7 I wills, which I thought was interesting. The significance there with the 7 and the completion, and just the idea that God is so willing and desiring to bless His children and to bless His people. And it was like, man,
it's
that
not
is
an
cool.
even contract.
No, it's that's exactly it. If you, I will. It's totally unfair, but it's unfair for our good.
Yeah.
Well,
It's incredible.
And it's really a perspective thing, and it breaks my heart when you hear people and they don't understand this, but people will ask the question, like, why won't Jesus let everyone into heaven? And it's kind of like, no, you don't understand. Like, Jesus is keeping us from hell. It's not so much like He's this mean bouncer at the door. No, He's somebody that's holding back just this fiery demise that we all deserve. So he's allowing us an opportunity to get something we don't deserve, where people are kind of like, He's in the way of something we do deserve. And I don't know if that makes sense, but that's just kind of like where they look at it as Jesus just doesn't let everyone into heaven, like willy-nilly. And
C.S. Lewis has a good riff on that where he says, basically, if you spent your entire life telling God to go away, He gives you what you asked for.
wow.
But where there is no God, there is no love or life. Heaven. And I remember my grandfather spent his whole life denying God and saying, I want to be with my friends. And my mother was a believer, and toward the end of his life said, you do realize you won't be with your friends. You'll be utterly alone. And and he had a deathbed conversion because his concept of heaven and hell, and that, like you said, that concept was all off. And so Lewis says, you spent your whole life telling God to go away. It's not that he's trying to keep you out; he'll give you exactly what you asked for.
I'll tell you that's
And in a way, that kind of, in a way, I hear God saying, "Man up and take responsibility." Right? We want God to be judgmental to people who are wicked, but when it comes to ourselves, we want Him to be merciful.
bingo.
And that's a little hypocritical,
Bingo.
and it's really a shallow understanding. So
Yeah,
that's,
I couldn't agree more. That's so well said. That's one of my. Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Andy. That's such a great perspective. It's what we want for ourselves, we aren't willing to extend to others, right?
Yeah. Or carry responsibility for our ultimate choice.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
But I stole it from Lewis, so I can't.
No. That's an Andy Fry special.
Yeah.
All right.
kind of like The Office. It's the quote from Lewis and then Andy Fry.
Yeah, that's right.
Steal from the best.
We'll take it.
Well, let's look into Philippians real quick, guys. So one thing, that's the book we're going to next. I think we've said that a few times here on Dig Deeper. One thing you're most excited about, and then what is something that could even kind of prep our listeners for like, hey, before we read Philippians, before we go through Philippians,
Read Philippians.
Yeah, read
Yep.
Philippians. Okay, is that yours? Okay.
It was a good place to start.
Yeah, that's
that's
a good base level. Read it first. Kind of
20 minutes, easy read.
yeah,
You
yep.
can do it.
Almost do it every day. I mean,
Yeah.
I've done that before.
Totally.
All right. So what about you?
Yeah, that's a good one. Man, I just one thing I love doing is I love reading it, and then I just love like praying through it and just going, Lord, teach me section by section. Another really great thing I love about starting new series is I love history, and so hopping in and just learning about the historical context surrounding Philippi, surrounding the area, what was going on politically, what was happening culturally. I just think that's fun. I think what that does. And I think this is so useful, especially as us three of us teach the Bible here, is infusing life into the text. Going, what would this have been like in that time? What would these words mean to these people? Because there's certain things culturally now that you and I key in on because we're a part of the culture in 2021. And so what are those things that they would recognize back then and go, oh, that's a diamond? That really unlocks the text. And I think if we can find what those diamonds were for them, it unlocks it and breathes something special into it for us today. And so, I love geeking out. I love reading as much historical history books about that time and then figuring stuff out. Another resource I love, I think I've shared it with you before, Tim, is there's this awesome study Bible called the Archaeological Study Bible. Yeah. It's very fascinating, and there's pictures in it and write-ups about the culture at that time, and super good. It's very beneficial. I think I have an old version. I think I get the new one, but it's very good. I love it.
And this is kind of like our pre-digging into Philippians, but now we're going to go keep digging. So we're going to go stick on the idea of resources, but I want resources as we wrap up, unless you were going to say anything else about Philippians.
Well, I'm a history teacher, so Austin was making my heart go pitter-patter.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, no, that's
wow.
I'm the chair of the history department over there. So you were just I got tingles up and down my spine, and
wow.
Oh, yeah, this is great.
Scratch my back, I
I'm
scratch
in the
yours.
way. I
Yeah.
feel like I'm on a first date.
It's
here.
a first date here.
I need to get out of the way.
It's a bromance. It's starting right here.
Yeah.
No, that's awesome. And again, with Philippians, I think, as Austin said so well, trying to bring this alive, that these are real people. One of the beautiful things about the Bible is, and again, as I've read other religious text, is that the Bible uniquely uses real people. You can hear the personality of Paul, who's kind of a crusty, sparky guy.
Yeah.
I think Peter somewhere says, Paul says a lot of really hard things to understand, but he's okay. And Paul later on says, well, I got in Peter's face. I mean, these are real people. And so these people at Philippi are real people. And all these churches got issues. That's why Paul's writing most of these letters. He's saying, hey, I love you guys. You're doing this well, but you got to knock this thing off. And it's us. They're as real as we are. And so the epistles are just fun because if you can get the history and kind of paint a picture or get the picture of what's going on in that culture, and then in that particular epistle, it's almost like when you hear Paul talking about something, that's the thing that they were doing that need to be corrected. And again, we often see ourselves and they go, oh, yeah, I've done that, or our church needs to work on that, or we Christians do these same things. So when he's talking about getting along, it's because they weren't getting along.
Yeah.
And not that it ever happens at River Valley, but
Never, not even once.
Never.
yeah, never. But so I mean, I think that's the exciting thing about connecting that to us, because these people are just as real.
Totally.
as we are. It's not some ethereal thing. It's very down to earth and connects to the reality of our daily life, just as it did then. So yeah.
It's awesome.
That's good. All right, well, one last look at resources for Leviticus. So whether a resource on the book of Leviticus or this idea of obedience.
Are you talking Leviticus or Philippians?
Leviticus. So
Leviticus,
yeah, we're going
last
to keep
one.
digging. We're wrapping up our
Wrapping up
final,
and
the final
moving
bow
forward.
on Leviticus.
On Philvicus. No, on
Phil
Leviticus. Right?
Leviticus.
Yeah.
There you go. The hybrid.
What book?
Leviticus. Last kind of keep digging, last resources on Leviticus.
Man,
Or have we exhausted all of them already?
maybe, dude. I think I've shared with you all of mine.
Okay,
I
all
think
right.
I have. Just go. I mean, here's the thing. I think one really awesome thing about our model here at RVC is that we do have many different teachers teaching each week, and so if you want more information, it's as simple as go check out what Pastor Tico had to say in Redwood if you listen to me every week, or go listen to what Mark said or what Andy said. So if you're like, man, Leviticus 16 was pretty awesome. Well, I think that's Day of Atonement, Leviticus 16. I heard what Austin said, but let's see what the real sensei had to say, Pastor Mark, and then go listen to him. So I would just suggest that maybe do a little rewind. Going on a road trip, we'll hit up each campus.
Yeah.
Why not?
Now, obviously, this week, if you're like, church at home was cool, but what's Redwood have to offer? Or what's downtown?
Joke's
You're
on
getting the
you.
Same guy.
He's everywhere.
Yeah. But that doesn't always happen. That's great. Yeah. Check
Yeah.
out our different campuses. So
Yeah.
Okay. Andy, what about you? Do you have any resources or?
Yeah, I don't think I have any that pop in my head. I will say that one of the crazy things that happened while I was digging in this was I found. So I will look at sermons that other pastors have preached just to get some insight. And Leviticus 26, I found a guy did a whole sermon on parenting, and it was brilliant. It actually,
Really?
he the principles of God's discipline, he applied it to, and it was absolutely. I would have never thought about that. And so it just reminded me that, there's always layers, right? And that's why hearing, multiple teachings, God's word has depth. It's not one dimensional.
Yeah.
There's layers and all the principles. Once I looked at Leviticus, I looked, wow, this guy's right. Didn't do that sermon, but it was a powerful insight. So getting multiple angles can really open up things you wouldn't think of on your first reading or so on. So that's kind of been part of the fun of digging in.
Yeah.
Deeper.
There it is.
Digging deep. That's a good bow right there.
Little branding there.
Wow.
It's a great bow. Well, on that note, gentlemen, I appreciate it. Andy, hope you enjoy your anniversary. Thank you. And Austin, I just hope you enjoy your day.
I'm bacheloring up right now, man.
Bacheloring up, yeah.
Wife's out of town.
Out of town for now, but she'll be back. She'll be back by the time the listeners get this, but hopefully it all went well. So, all right, listeners, thank you. Gentlemen, thank you. We will catch you all next week as we go into Philippians.